Let me introduce our first speaker, Shivam. Shivam works at Red Hat as a software engineer. He is an open source enthusiast and contributing to multiple open source projects. Currently, he contributes extensively to Tekton and Pipeline as code. He's a maintainer for Tekton Hub, Tekton Operator, and Pipeline as code. We are really glad to have Shivam as our first speaker today. Let's make it as an interactive session. If you got any questions, please don't hesitate. Shoot it away. Yeah. So Shivam, take it over.
Okay, are you able to see my screen now?
Yep. Not in slide mode though. Yeah, right now.
Okay. Thanks for the intro, Hanbal. So hello everyone. Nice to meet you all. Thanks for coming. And I'm Shivam Mukhade. I worked at Red Hat as a software engineer. As Hanbal mentioned in the intro, I work on Tekton mostly and Pipeline as code. So today I will be sharing with you about Pipeline as code and what it is and why it is come into picture and how do we use it. Okay, so today's agenda is we go through Tekton, what Tekton Pipelines is, we go through a short demo of Tekton Pipelines, and then Pipeline as code. So Tekton and Pipeline as code are two different projects, but they are interlinked, and using them together makes a very helpful flow for us, for a developer. Okay, so before going into Tekton, so let's just see what the CI/CD is. So we may have an idea what CI/CD is like. When we create a pull request on any Git repo, we want our code to be tested, right? We want to run unit tests. We want to run end-to-end tests. We want to test it. We want to build it before we merge the code. So we don't want any random piece of code to get merged. So we run some test. Which we do through some pipeline that may be Jenkins or GitHub Actions. So that has some meaning, right? To make our code better and better, to develop high quality of code. If we don't have pipeline, then the reviewer will have to fetch the code and test it locally, which will take time and it will waste of time for everyone. So we write a CI/CD pipeline. So we know there are multiple options to write CI/CD. Popular one, you must have heard about Jenkins or Circle CI. One of them is Tekton. So Tekton is an open source framework which for writing CI/CD pipelines. So Tekton is Kubernetes native, which runs on Kubernetes, and we are going to see what Tekton is today. So Tekton is like a big umbrella, and under Tekton there are a lot of sub-projects. The core being the pipelines. So pipelines is nothing but pipelines provide some CRDs or CRs through which we define our pipeline. Let's say we want to build our code, run unit test, and run end-to-end tests. So that we can do using pipelines. So pipeline is like a core of Tekton through which we write our pipelines and run on a project. So there are other sub-projects which creates the whole ecosystem. So triggers are nothing but like event mechanism. So let's say we create a pull request, right? So we don't want to run the pipeline manually. We want some automation. So whenever there is a pull request created, we should run our pipeline. So triggers help with that. We have a CLI too. So Tekton provides a CLI which you can to interact with Tekton resources specifically, to create a pipeline, to run a pipeline, to list the pipeline, to see the logs of the pipeline. So we are going to see a demo for that also. And dashboard. So to see on a UI, that would be also helpful, right? So Tekton also provide a dashboard. We do have an operator. So operator is like an installation and managing application kind of thing. So it will install all these components for you and also maintain them. So if there is a new version released, then operator will help you to upgrade to a new version. That logic is currently being developed in operator. We have a catalog. We will go through the catalog. And catalog is like shared resources, like which are created by community for different developers. So anyone can take resources from this catalog and use them in their pipelines. So we will see what those resources are today and how to use them. Hub is a UI platform which hosts this catalog. It makes it easy to find resources and to use them directly. Chains is like a new project recently, not too new, but it helps in like to sign your images to make them more secured. And results is like a storage, you can say, where you can store your logs or how many pipelines you run. So it is kind of a database for storing your Tekton resources or logs. So today we are mostly going to see pipelines, and we are going to use the different projects with them. So before we into pipelines, let's take an example. How do we run a pipeline if we don't have any tools like Tekton or Jenkins, or let's say we don't have anything to run our pipeline, we want to do it manually. And let's assume that we have a Go project. So let's say someone has created a pull request on a project and you want to test your pipe, or you want to test the pull request, right? So what do we do? We will first clone the code, which is in the pull request. After that, we will run some command, right? Go test, or depending on the project. And then we will run some goal and CI to do some lint tests. If everything passes, if we have any other tests like end to end, we will run that and we will say it's done. So if every of this step passes, then let's say that the code is good and we can merge that. But this means we are doing it manually, right? That doesn't make sense to do it every time. So let's translate this into a Tekton pipeline, and then we will go a bit deep in each one of them. So Tekton has a concept called as task. Task is nothing but which does a something specific thing. So let's say there is so here we can see a git clone task. So what this task will do, it will git clone. It will clone the code. So when you write a pipeline for that CI solution, or here the Tekton, so Tekton to run your test, it has to clone your code, right? So the first step would be to clone your code. So we will use a git clone task. We will see an example of the task soon. Then for the go test, we will use a go test task. And for lint, we will use a lint task. So we replace each of the steps with a particular of that task. So this was in Go, right? So let's say we have a Node.js application. Like it's a, so what would the step change would be like? The first would be the same. Like we will clone that code. It's in different language. Only the thing which are like running the test or linting, that will change. But the first step will be same, right? We are just cloning code. So if we compare this to pipeline, we can see this is the same thing, right? There is the same task which can be used there. So tasks are written such that they can be reused. So if I write a task today for a certain thing, let's say for sending a data from A to B, then same task anyone can use, which can send a data from A to B. So tasks are reusable, which so when I mentioned Tekton catalog, so Tekton catalog hosts tasks which are reusable. So if you want to run Go test, you can just take a task from the hub and just use it directly. You don't need to rewrite it. Okay, so this is a pipeline. So let's go through this. So we saw a task. Task does a specific thing, right? It will run a test. It might run a lint test, or you can build your code, something like that. A task has steps. So step is not a resource, but it's breaking down your task. Let's say we have a task which build and push your push your image, right? So let's say if we want to build our image locally, we will use Docker, right? We will do Docker build, and then we will do Docker push to push that image to an image registry. So we will write a task for that. The first step would be to build the image, Docker build, and the second step would be to Docker push. So we can write a task and which will be generalized, right? Which is building and pushing the image. So we can share that task with everyone, which does this thing, which building and pushing the image. So something like that. So task consists of steps. There could be multiple steps. When we use multiple tasks together, that create a pipeline. So and in Tekton, so as we in code we have, right, like if else condition. So if this is true, then do this. If not, then do the other part. So here we could have some condition like if the output of this is A, execute this task. If it's not A, then do this, like a if else condition. So that's also a feature which is provided by Tekton, which also you can do. So here to build and deploy an image. So we will have a first git task, which would be clone. We will see the syntax in a bit. How do we write a pipeline or task? So here we have a git task which clones the code. The second will be building the image, and this here deploy. Deploy is nothing but applying that image on a cluster using some task. So here it's the OC deploy. In this case, the orders is important, right? So we don't want to build the image before we clone the code. So there is a field called as run after, which says that run this task after this is executed. Otherwise, it doesn't make sense to build something unless we have a code, right? So we give some order. So run this after this. So that's the flow which we can develop. Okay, so we have different tasks: git clone, build, OC deploy, and we write a pipeline which use those tasks. So we just refer the task name here, and we create a pipeline. So pipeline is nothing but a template. So it will say what to do. But if you apply this on a Kubernetes cluster, nothing will happen because it's just defining a step or a template to what should be done. To start a pipeline, we have a resource called as PipelineRun, which is an instance of that pipeline. So here on the right side, you can see we have like 3 pipeline runs, right? So you can create as many as pipeline runs you want from a pipeline. Basically, every time, so let's say a pull request is created and we have a pipeline which is created for some test and building. So we will create a new pipeline run with some parameters based on the pull request, right? So if the pull request number is, let's say 100, then we will have some parameter which takes the pull request number and execute this logic on that pull request code. If a new pull request is created, then we will create another pipeline run, basically. So pipeline is the instance, and pipeline is a logic or a template which has to be executed. So as I mentioned, Tekton Hub. So this is all the resources or tasks which can be reused. So if depending on a project, you can find the task and use that in your pipeline, basically. Okay, before going to Tekton Triggers, we will just see a demo and see the pipeline concept a bit. Okay, the first thing we saw was task, right? So let's say we want to create a hello world task. So Tekton, so this is a Tekton, so Tekton provided CRD called as task. We define a task. In the spec, we define steps, what things should be done. Like the first step is to print hello world. So it's just a simple task. So this is a task which will just do hello world, print hello world, basically. So we are using Alpine image. Every time a step we need to write a step, we will use a image, which depending on what do we want to do. So here we are just using Alpine and we just say hello world. Okay, so I have a kind cluster locally running, and if I do kubectl get namespace, so I have Tekton pipelines running. So I haven't covered installation this, but I will link some blocks at the end to get you how to install the stuff and configure those things. Okay, so let's start with creating the first task. So if I do kubectl apply and 01. So we have created our first task. So we discussed a few minutes back about Tekton, right? So Tekton is a CLI which is provided by Tekton. So you can, so to get or create Tekton resources, we can use Tekton. So if we do Tekton task ls, so we can see there is a task created, which we just have created hello world. But it's doing nothing, right? There is no, if we do kubectl get pods, it is not doing anything. It's just a static resource kind of thing. To run the task, so we discussed pipeline run. So similarly, we have a task run. So if we have a single task, we use task run. If we have multiple tasks, we use pipeline and then pipeline run. So let's say we want to run this task, which is just doing hello world, right? So here the syntax would be we create a task run, we give some name, and we refer the task which was hello. If we have a locally, right? So if we do Tekton, we have a hello task, we will just start a task run with this task. So if I do kubectl apply, so we have created that, and if we do tkn task run, so tr is a short form of task run, and you can see the task run was started and it just succeeded. So to see the logs, we can see that using, so yes, the task is completed and it has created a printed hello world, which was a simple task just to demo purpose. Okay, the next thing is, let's say we apply that task again. Okay, let's apply the task again, which say unchanged, right? It has not created a new one. So to create a new one, we use generate name basically. So we are using the same task, but we want to create a new instance of that task. We want to run a new run that task again. So we can do kubectl create and 03. So we can see a new task run is created. Now if we do tk ls, we can see a new task run was created, which is also completed. Now if we do tk and task run logs, and we can select which logs do we want to see. This was completed like 16 seconds ago. That was a recent one. So that's how we can run multiple task run from a same task. Okay, the next step is we have another task which is doing goodbye. Like it just say goodbye world. We had a hello world, and this is like goodbye world. We will create this task. Okay, so if we do tk task ls, we can see there are two tasks, hello and goodbye world. And now we will create a pipeline. If we see pipeline, there is a kind called pipeline, and we have a array of tasks where we will define how many tasks we do. Like how many tasks are there in the pipeline. The first is hello. The name is hello, and the task ref is name hello. So this is the same task which we have installed on the cluster. This one, and the second one is goodbye. So we are saying run this task after this one is completed, and we refer this by its name, goodbye. So if we create this pipeline, and do tk, so P is small for pipeline, and if you can see, there is a pipeline created, but it doesn't say last run or started because we haven't started that pipeline run. So pipeline is just a template to do, which says Tekton what you to do or what you need to do. So let's see. We create a pipeline run. So in the pipeline run, we just refer the pipeline which we want to run. So this was the pipeline which we created, and we will start this pipeline using this pipeline run. So if we do create, so and we do, so PR is small, like a short form of pipeline run, and we can see the pipeline run is started. And if we do the logs for the pipeline run, we can see that it's did two things. The first one print a hello world, and the second was goodbye world, because we used two tasks in the pipeline. Okay, that was pipeline run. So now we are seeing, right, we have referred a name by. So for this to work, your pipeline should be installed on the cluster, right? So there is another way where you can embed the logic inside your pipeline run, but this makes your pipeline not reusable or not shareable because it like tie up with PipelineRun. So it's the same thing which we did previously, but I've just like embedded all the spec of the task and task run in this side. So this is a PipelineRun, and which is using pipeline. So which says run this two tasks, which is hello, the, which is a task hello, which is doing two things like echo hello world and goodbye world. It's doing the same thing, but the only difference is how it is written. So we are just embedding all the logic inside this thing. So this, if we don't have anything on the cluster, if we haven't applied this, and if we directly run this will do the same thing. So why this is like needed, I will just tell you after some time when we started. And if we do pk and pr logs, we can select the pipeline. It is still running, and okay, something is okay. Let me fix it. Okay, so now we can see the logs are there. So we have run two pipeline runs, which are completed basically. So to recap, so we have a task which does some specific thing. To run the task, we use task run, which runs that task and execute. We had another task which was doing a different thing, which was just printing goodbye world, and we created a pipeline which was using both the tasks together. Pipeline is just a template, and once we have the template, we run the template using PipelineRun, and which will just execute the pipeline. The embedded one we will. So this is like if you do this way, then if you will have to share this pipeline directly, like you can't reuse the task. But this is helpful in some ways. We'll go through it in a bit. So this was the concept of pipeline, Tekton City pipeline basically. Any questions till now? Like any doubts or any comments till so that we can move ahead?
I don't see any questions on the chat, so maybe you can go ahead.
Okay, cool. Okay, so we saw Tekton City pipeline. So if you see here, we started the pipeline manually, right? We run everything manually because but this is not an ideal way to do it. Like we want some automation. We don't want to create the pipeline each time manually when we want to test some pull request or deploy some code using a pipeline. So Tekton has another project which is called Triggers, which provides an event triggering mechanism. So Tekton Triggers also run on Kubernetes cluster, which is a separate runs as a separate pods. You can integrate that with any Git platform. So if we take an example of GitHub or GitLab, whenever a pull request is created or a new commit is pushed, Git platforms emit some events. So we can listen to that event and do some stuff. For example, let's say we create a pull request. GitHub will generate an event, pull request event. And we can. So there is a concept called as a webhook. So webhook, we can integrate that with our Tekton triggers, and once the event is passed to Tekton triggers will figure out or take the data and start a particular pipeline run. One thing which is missing or not supported in triggers is like Tekton trigger will start your pipeline, but it will not report the status of the pipeline, whether the pipeline is succeeded or failed, back to your Git platform. So it's a one-way thing. So to fulfill this, to make an end-to-end flow, so let's say a developer has integrated Tekton triggers with their Git repo, and on their project they have a release pipeline or let's say CI/CD pipeline, and it is run, but for a developer to check the status, they will have to go to the cluster and check, or they will have to implement some task which do that thing. So we can write a task which look for the status of pipeline and then report the status back. But like Tekton Triggers internally doesn't have any support for that to report the status. So for this purpose, we have pipeline as code. So pipeline as code is like a triggers mechanism, but with a complete end-to-end flow. It will run the pipeline for you and also report the status back to you on your pull request or your repo. So I will not go in so deep in triggers, but you can check it out. There are different use cases where triggers is helpful, but for running Tekton pipelines or on your repo or in CI, pipelines code makes more sense. So we will see that in a bit. So pipeline as code is similar to triggers, which we also integrate with Git platform. So we also listen for events. Based on that events, we will run some pipeline on the cluster. When the pipeline is completed, we report the status back to the cluster, to the Git platform, sorry. Once you have integrated pipeline as code with your cluster, the developer doesn't have to go to the cluster and check the status. Everything will be on the Git platform. That's how pipeline as code is like helpful on top of triggers. So what does pipeline as code do? So if you see here, so one main feature of pipeline as code is your pipeline doesn't need to be on the cluster. You can keep your pipeline task in your Git repo, and pipeline as code will fetch that task or pipeline from there, run it on the cluster, and get the status back. Pipeline as code support two events. One is the push or pull request event. So it makes sense to, so let's say you have created a pull request, right? We will run some pipeline and get the status back to you. We will see a demo in a bit. Or a push event. Let's say a pull request is merged, or let's say we have created a new tag or a new release. Then we can run a specific pipeline to deploy the code on some cluster. So there are like two ways supported for pipeline as code. On GitHub, you will find GitHub app using GitHub app or a GitHub webbook. Pipeline as code is also supported on other Git platforms like GitLab and Bitbucket Cloud and Server. The only so the GitHub app is recommended on GitHub because it gives a better view. So these are the check runs, which we will see in a bit. But this is how you will get status. There are like multiple pipeline for your project. Each will have one section or a check run, which is GitHub check run, and it will return the status back to you as reported on the right side of this slide. Like you will get the status right. This like there were two tasks in your pipeline, and it succeeded or failed. It will get the status back to you. We also support webbook. Let's say some user don't have like permission to create GitHub app. In that case, we also have webbook support. The only difference is how we report the status. In case of GitHub app, we get a separate page where we can report like a table structure, and we can show more info. But in case of webbook, we just have permission to add a comment on the pull request basically. So we add a comment saying what was the status of that pipeline. So we can directly go to the demo now. So but for the pipeline as code, the repo is OpenShift pipeline / pipeline as code. It's in OpenShift pipeline stuff, but it's not directly or anyway tied to OpenShift. It works on Kubernetes and any Kubernetes platform, just to make it clear. And we do have a documentation website, which is pipelineascode.com, where you can find how to configure GitHub application or GitHub webbook with pipeline as code. And okay, so yeah, let's go to the demo. I hope the terminal is visible.
Yep, it's visible. Yeah.
Okay, so I have installed pipeline as code too. So I will link some blocks which will help you to install that. So I have a namespace where pipeline as code is installed. Pipeline as code is like directly tied to Tekton pipeline. So the basic requirement for pipeline as code is the Tekton pipeline should be installed because we run Tekton pipelines, right? So pipeline as code is top top of Tekton pipelines. And I will be using a demo application, which is, okay, I will just go to the repo. So this is a demo application, which is nothing but a simple web app written in Go. So we will be setting a couple of Tekton pipelines on this repo, and we will see how that is executed. Okay, so I have installed a GitHub app previously on this repo. I have configured everything. If we have time at last, I will go through that steps, how to do that, or I will just link the blogs at last. So if I go, so this is the clone code of that repo. And so the first thing that we need to do is to create a .tekton folder, because one prerequisite is that your pipeline should be in .tekton folder. So let's say this is my code repo, and I will create a folder which is .tekton. So in this, I need to put my pipelines, which I want pipeline as code to run on the cluster. So I have created already. So I will just copy that. So I will just go through them, what they are in a bit. Okay, we have two pipelines which we want to run on any code changes or a pull request. So how do I make it smaller? Okay, so the first pipeline is build pipeline, which is doing like fetching the Git repo using a Git clone task. And the second thing is building the code. So it will just make sure the code is built properly. If there are any failures, it will just fail the pipeline. And so this is just
Sure, sorry to interrupt. So
yeah.
We can have the repository configured from any VCS system, right? Be it like GitHub, Bitbucket, or yeah.
Yeah. So with pipeline as code, you can use GitHub or any Git repo. The only difference would be how you configure it. If we are using webhook, then the difference would be how it is reporting the status basically. I'll just go here. If I show here again, so this is how you will get the response on GitHub app or on any other with webhook. Maybe it's on GitHub or GitLab. You will get the response as a comment. That's the only difference with the Git platforms. So we have a pipeline which is doing like two things: fetching the code and running build test. One thing which I haven't covered before is a workspace. So let's say when we run the code locally, like running the test file, we have our machine, right? We have some memory where we can clone our code. So Tekton also needs some volume where it can run like clone the code and run the test or any task. So we create a workspace. A workspace is nothing but a volume where we can keep our code, basically the pipeline. So all the tasks will share this volume to like access the code and run test on it, basically. And so this is another thing. So let's say if your repo is private, right? So you will need some secret to be created to clone that repo. So pipeline as codes gives another feature where you just need to like provide this template here with secret name, and pipeline as code will create a secret for you to run with that pipeline. So you don't need to create any secret. Pipeline as code will do on behalf of you, and it will get removed once the pipeline is completed. So that is a feature of pipeline as code. Okay, so we saw we have two tasks, which is using git clone, right? But how do we install that on cluster? So pipeline provide a way through annotation. So if you like here, so if you like add a annotation called as pipeline code tekton.dev task and provide the name of the task, so this task will be fetched from Tekton hub by pipeline as code, and it will use directly with this. So you don't need to do anything on the cluster. You just mention the name of the task, and pipeline code will do it for you. Let's say, so this task will be fetched from the Tekton catalog or Tekton hub basically. But if we have task which is in some other Git repo, so you can also give a URL for that task. So it will fetch for you. So you don't need to do anything on the cluster. You just need to mention it here, like where do you want to fetch it from, and it will do it for you. There is also a annotation to mention which event we should run this pipeline, right? So there could be a pipeline which you want to run on only on if a new tag is created, like if a new release is created. So we don't want to run it on a pull request. So you can just mention it here, and it's just filtering out which event do you want or which branch do you want. So you don't want this pipeline run to execute on any branch, right? So we just want on main. So you can just mention it here. So these are like arrays. So you can just mention it as an array. So yeah, so these are the different annotation of features which are provided by pipeline as code, which yeah, basically a filtering mechanism. And I talked about another pipeline run which we have, which is doing like cloning the code and running the lint test, just to make sure we don't need to have two pipeline runs, because we can have one pipeline run which does build test and go lint test. But for demo purpose, I will have two pipeline runs separate, just to show we can have multiple pipeline runs running, but it's not required. So in this case, we do have that annotation to tell pipeline as code, like this is the task I want to use, just fetch it for me and use it in the class. So we saw an example before, right? If I go back here, this example, right? Like where everything was embedded inside the pipeline run. So pipeline as code does the same thing. It will fetch the task, it will take that logic from the task, and it will embed that logic into this. So it will not apply the task on the cluster, but it will take all the logic and embed that inside this. So it will be something similar to this one, which we saw earlier. So once pipeline's code fetch the task and embed all the logic inside this, it will create the task on the cluster. Once the pipeline is run successfully, it will report the status back and delete the thing. So everything will be deleted. There is nothing on the cluster. Okay, so we have two pipeline runs in the .tekton folder. So we will just commit this, and we will create. So I will create a new branch, pack CI test, and if I do git status, so I have Tekton folder, right? I have created and added two pipeline runs in there. And if I do just commit it, okay, so and I will push it to the pack CI test branch, and I will create a pull request. Okay, if I select this branch, so we can see here, we are creating a pull request from pack CI test branch to our main branch, and there are like two pipeline runs in the .tekton folder, and we have already configured pipeline as code with this repo, which we will discuss a bit later. So if I start a pull request and I say create a pull request, and so now we can see there are two pipelines which are started. So the first one is news demo CI build, and the second is news demo CI linked. So if I go on this, it says like the pipeline is running, and if you want to see the logs, so we don't like stream any logs on the GitHub platform, but we do provide the link. Okay, so this, if we go back here again, refresh it. So the pipelines are completed. We can see the status here, and if we go here, so we can see the status here. Like there were two tasks, and the first one, and the both are succeeded and they're completed. If you want to see the logs, we provide the link. And earlier I talked about a Tekton dashboard, right? So this is the Tekton dashboard where you can interact or see the Tekton resources. So pipeline runs basically. So if I go to pipeline runs, So we can see there are 2 pipeline runs which are created, there was one with the build and the other one was a lint. If we want to see the logs, here we can see all the logs basically. Okay, that was that. But if we see, there is no task or there is no pipeline on the cluster or in the news demo application, because everything was embedded inside that. If we go on the cluster, kubectl get pipeline runs. Okay, so we saw this where we can, so now, so let's say we merge this, and so this will be stored in our main run. So now whenever there is a new pull request created with this, then these 2 pipelines will run on those pull requests basically. This is also helpful, but let's say we can also create a release pipeline in this, where you can have the event as push only, and you can mention the tag as this. Like, so let's say if you push a new tag, let's say there is a new release 1.0, then we can just mention it here ref/tag, and that pipeline will run only on a release. So we can have release pipeline with this. So there are multiple features with pipelines code. You can like have some complex filtering also. Like if we want to show an example, so let's say we also have a filter. If this file is changed, then only run this pipeline. So you can mention something like this, a CL expression. You can say if event is pull request and the files are changed in this docs folder, then only run that pipeline. Otherwise, don't need to run that. So you can do that stuff also with this. So you can check like the other features through the pipelinescode.com. You will get all the documentation here, how to configure, and with like GitHub app or GitHub webbook. And we also support concurrency. So let's say we want only 2 pipelines at a time running for any repo. So you can also configure that too. So it's a basic concurrency feature yet, but we are still working on some complex concurrency features. So that will be in soon. So if you want to go through Tekton and the pipelines code, so I do have some blogs on the Medium. So you can just use SM43 as the username, and you can go to some blogs that has all the installation and the demo which I did today with some different examples, but you can find there. And yeah, that's all from me. If you want to reach out to me, you can just use this. It's the same handle everywhere, SM43, and so you can just reach out to me or any help. Yeah, that's all from me. Thank you.
Yeah, if I can ask a question now.
Yeah.
So like Jenkins, I believe you can do conditional execution of the tasks also, right? Not tasks, sorry, the tasks and the steps here in Tekton, right?
Mm-hmm.
Right. So just on the status part, right? Because what I could understand from the pipeline as code was that you can get a status. Essentially that is one part of the solution that you have mentioned. Right? Now, is it not possible that we add a step at the end of the pipeline where you say if the remaining steps, the previous steps run successfully, then you execute this step, and essentially that step provides the status back to the repository? Isn't that possible without using pipeline as a code?
Yes. So when I mentioned triggers, I did mention this, like we can have a task which you can do that stuff, which can report the status back to like Git platform or anywhere you want, or on Slack also. But that means you will have to include that task in all your pipelines. And if you write a new pipeline, you will have to write that there also. That's a configuration thing. But what this pipelines could do, so once this is configured, then it's just give a end-to-end flow. And which benefit of pipelines could do, your pipelines stay in your code, right? And let's say you want to fix something, so you can just create a pull request and fix that. you don't need to go and cluster and apply or something. With triggers, you will have to go and update the pipeline on the trigger on the cluster basically.
Okay.
Yeah. Also, like the other thing, the annotation thing. So currently, yeah, this is now been added in Tekton CD pipeline also, the resolvers. So you don't need to apply the task, the resolvers to do. So those are recently added, but pipelines could support that from initially, like to fetch the task and use that in your pipeline. But yeah, so we might remove this feature from pipelines code and use just the upstream one. That is more beneficial, but that will be in future. Yeah.
Okay. There's one more question, right? So typically in an organization, even though we say DevSecOps or DevOps, there are two different teams, right? So one is the developer community, and then there's the DevOps community, right? Essentially, the DevOps guy finally releases the product to the cluster, right? So in this particular case, obviously there are multiple checks that comes in between, correct? It's not a fully automated. Yes, there are organizations which do a complete automation as well. So here, who is responsible for the pipeline here? I mean, are you expecting developers to write the pipeline as a code, manage that pipeline as a code file, or will it be the DevOps team who will do that? Who does that?
So the goal is like to anyone who writes code, or maintains the pipe. So the instance pipelines code will for sure maintained by the admin. So let's say today, so as a developer, I create a pull request and I have integrated triggers and Tekton pipeline with it. And my pipeline is ran on the cluster, but I don't know the status of operations. So I will have to go to the cluster and then figure out. So this is helpful for developers, but the pipeline can be written by anyone, the DevOps or developer also, depending on who is maintaining the code. As we are going at, like developers are maintaining their own projects, so this will be helpful. Like developers can just create a pull request and update their task or pipelines with the new features or what they want.
Right. Just to add some points, right? Like I think, it's a collective effort. So the point here is that it's being the single source of truth. Everyone supposed to contribute to the same the code system. And then the merge permission or the approval permission would be relying on the people who have the knowledge about the entire system. So something like that. But every developer or any DevOps guy supposed to send the request, pull request, and maybe make it as a improvement in the process. Any other questions? Anything from your end?
So that's all.
Great. Okay, so let me stop.
Ambal, can I ask one question?
Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah. So Shivam, I was just trying to understand what goes under the hood when I'm adding an annotation and how it's fetching.
Okay, so if you just provide a name of the task, or so it also supports version like :version, it will fetch from hub, which is nothing but the Tekton catalog. You can also configure your own like a catalog also. So our customers, some of our customers have their own catalogs. So they provide just the URL of that catalog and they will just fetch it from that. So you can just provide a HTTP URL also, or a Tekton catalog URL, depending on the requirement.
Okay. And one more thing is that the fuzzy finder thing, which was helpful because I was able to, means I don't have to always do this kubectl get pipeline runs and to logs. So was it configured from your side, or is it coming native with Tekton CLI?
You mean like listing the pipeline and
no, the fuzzy finder thing.
Sorry, I didn't get you. Can you please repeat once?
I'm just asking that the Tekton CLI natively supports fuzzy finder, or was it configured from your side?
Yeah, Tekton supports that. That you can CLI.
Yep, it was helpful.
Yep.
Any other questions? If not, I can stop recording. Once again, Shivam, thanks a lot for a great session on Tekton and build pipeline. It was really an enlightening one. Thanks a lot.